Have you ever loved someone with such a blinding devotion that you failed to see the glint of the blade they held behind their back? It is a fool's bargain, a trade of unconditional love for inevitable pain. That is how people like me are made, carved from the soft wood of trust and left splintered by betrayal. My name is Delene Ward, and if my voice is reaching you now, across whatever distance separates us, I ask you to learn the one lesson that cost me everything. Never, ever mistake silence for peace. Sometimes, the quiet is not an absence of conflict. Sometimes, it is simply the storm gathering its breath, watching you, waiting for the perfect moment to break. I had not set foot, or rather wheel, inside a ballroom for years. Not since the wreck, the one that stole the conversation between my nerves and my legs, leaving them in a permanent, unyielding silence. But there I was, on that brilliant Saturday afternoon, the wheels of my chair polished to a mirror shine, rolling across the threshold of the Regency Grand Hall. My lavender dress, the color of twilight and memory, was pressed and perfect. In my lap, I held a small, dark blue velvet box, cradling it as if it were a second heartbeat. Inside rested my late husband's gold watch. It was a beautiful thing, a timepiece not just of hours and minutes, but of a lifetime. Of promises kept, and a love that outlasted breath. It was the watch my dear Roy had always said was for our son Marcellus, the day he truly became a man. And on this day, his wedding day, I foolishly believed that moment had finally arrived. I saw the watch not just as an heirloom but as a peace offering, a gilded olive branch meant to bridge the silent, aching canyon that had grown between a mother and her only son. Looking back, the naivety of that hope is almost staggering. I did not come to the grand affair alone. Langston, a man whose quiet strength had become a gentle anchor in the turbulent waters of my life, had insisted. He had been my +1, his invitation secured long before I knew of the event. He said it would mean the world for me to be there, to see family, even if from a distance. Langston is the kind of man who never raises his voice, for he doesn't have to. When he speaks, the very acoustics of a room seem to shift, leaning in to catch his words. He had been Marcellus's boss for nearly a decade, a mentor who had opened doors my son believed he had kicked down all by himself. Marcellus, in his ambition, had never bothered to learn the depth of our connection, the quiet history that bound Langston to me long before he ever hired my son. The hall itself was an assault on the senses, a cathedral built to the god of money. It did not just look expensive, it smelled of it. A cloying perfume of imported orchids, lilies, and old wealth hung heavy in the air. The chairs were gilded, shining under the light of chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen tears. Waiters dressed in stark black and white moved through the crowd with a practiced, silent grace, their movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed. It was a world away from the simple, honest life I knew. When the great oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and the bride appeared, a vision in white silk and borrowed dreams, every head in that cavernous room turned. Every head, that is, except one. My son's. His eyes, the same dark, intense eyes I had gazed into the day he was born, scanned the room and landed on me, and in that instant, the air in my lungs turned to ice. There was no joy in his gaze, no surprise, no flicker of warmth. There was only a cold, hard fury, as if my very presence, my act of breathing the same perfumed air as his wealthy new family, was a personal insult. Mom. His voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the delicate melody of the string quartet. The music faltered, a violin screeching for a half-second before falling silent. People turned, their faces initially painted with soft, indulgent smiles, assuming this was a tender moment between mother and son, but then they saw his face. The smile on his lips was a cruel twist, a sneer that did not reach his eyes. His handsome features contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Who let her in here? The question hung in the suddenly silent hall, ugly and exposed. Beside me, I felt Langston's powerful frame tense, the subtle shift of muscle as he prepared to rise to my defense. I placed my hand on his arm, a gentle pressure. "Don't," I whispered, my voice barely a thread of sound. "Please." In that moment, a foolish part of my heart still wanted to believe. "It's just the nerves," I told myself. "Wedding day jitters." He doesn't mean it. But he did, Marcellus marched down the aisle, away from his bride, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles pulsing in his cheek. His perfectly knotted silk tie seemed to choke him. He stopped directly in front of my chair, looming over me, a storm cloud in a tailored suit. "You should not be here." His voice was low now, a venomous hiss meant only for me, but in the dead silence of the room it carried like a shout. "I came to surprise you," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. I lifted the small velvet box from my lap. "Your father's watch. I wanted you to have." He never let me finish. His hand shot out, not to take the box but to dismiss it with a flick of his wrist. "Do you think this is some kind of charity dinner?" His voice erupted, a roar of sound that cracked the elegant facade of the room in two. "I never invited you, you poor rat." The words hit me with a physical force. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I heard a snort of derisive laughter from somewhere near the front, the distinct click and flash of a cell phone camera. But I remember the weight of his hand on my wheelchair more than the sound of his voice. He shoved it. It wasn't a violent, bone-breaking push, but it was firm, deliberate, and filled with malice. It was a push designed not to injure, but to humiliate. To discard. The world tilted on its axis. My wheels, so carefully polished, jerked sideways. The chair tipped, and I fell, hitting the cold marble floor with a sickening thud. My palms scraped against the unforgiving surface, the sting of it sharp and immediate. My breath left my body in a choked sob before I could even process the shock. For a moment, there was nothing but the ringing in my ears and the sight of 100 pairs of expensive shoes. That's when a small pair of hands appeared in my field of vision. Tiny, gentle hands. "It's okay, ma'am," a little girl's voice said, strained with effort as she struggled to help me. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, a flower girl with a ribbon in her hair. She grabbed the arm of my chair, pulling with all her might. Her eyes, large and brown and startlingly familiar, met mine. In that moment, I did not know who she was, but something deep in my chest, a sleeping, wounded part of my soul, shifted. It recognized her. She helped me steady the chair, her small frame a bastion of kindness in a room full of staring, frozen adults. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice hoarse with unshed tears. The hall remained utterly silent, the air thick with a toxic cocktail of shock and embarrassment. No one else came to help. Not the bride, not her wealthy parents, and not my son. Langston finally stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury, his jaw set like granite. But I shook my head again, a small, desperate gesture. I did not want a scene. Not a bigger one than the one my son had already painted with his cruelty. When I looked up at Marcellus, he had already turned his back on me. He had his arm around his bride, whispering something in her ear, pretending as if nothing had happened, as if his mother was not sitting on the floor just a few feet away. The laughter started again, nervous at first, a few hesitant chuckles. Then it grew, becoming real, the kind of laughter people use to bury their guilt, to signal that the uncomfortable moment had passed and the performance could resume. So, I did the only thing a woman with a shattered heart and a straight spine could do. With the help of the small, unknown girl, I pulled myself back into my chair. I adjusted my shawl, my hands shaking, but my movements deliberate. I placed the velvet box back onto my lap, and with as much dignity as I could muster, I turned my chair and rolled toward the great oak doors. "Is she really leaving?" I heard someone whisper, as if my pain was a spectacle they were entitled to watch until the very end. At the exit, Langston caught up to me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder. "Dell, I didn't know he was capable of." "I didn't know either," I said, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass on my lips. "But now we both do." He nodded, his eyes hard and cold now, the strategist within him awakening. "You do not deserve that, Deline." "I know," I replied, my voice finding a sliver of strength. "But just watch what happens next. He will learn what grace truly costs on the day it finally decides to walk away." I did not look back. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing my tears. The sound of the laughter and the resumed music faded behind me, replaced by the distant hum of the city and the soft, steady whir of my wheels on the cool marble. I pressed the velvet box against my chest, a fragile shield against a truth that was now undeniable. My son had just traded his mother for a round of applause. And though I did not know it then, The little girl who had helped me up, the one with the familiar brown eyes, was the keeper of a secret that was about to burn his entire world to the ground. That night, sleep was a stranger. I did not cry, because tears felt like a currency I was no longer willing to spend on him. Instead, I sat in the quiet glow of my small kitchen, the city of Atlanta whispering a lullaby of rain against the window pane. Every drop that traced a path down the glass sounded like a word I did not want to hear, a judgment, a memory. The velvet box sat on the table before me, a silent, gleaming accusation. It was a relic from a life I no longer recognized, a promise made to a boy who had vanished long ago, replaced by the cold-eyed man who had pushed me to the floor. Behind me, the soft, padding sound of little feet on the old linoleum floor broke the silence. "Grandma Dell, you still up?" Zora's voice was a melody in the quiet room, light and sweet, the kind of sound that finds you even when you do not wish to be found. She stood there in her little nightgown, her stuffed lion clutched by its tail, her eyes half closed with sleep. I turned in my chair, the quiet whir of the wheels a familiar comfort. I forced a smile onto my face, a mask I had grown adept at wearing. "Come here, sugar." She climbed into my lap, her movements careful and gentle around my legs, a consideration her own father had never learned. Her small head rested against my shoulder, a warm and trusting weight. At 8 years old, she was a paradox, too grown for lullabies, but far too small for the kind of hurt this world was capable of inflicting. I brushed a stray curl from her forehead, my fingers lingering on the impossible softness of her skin. "Did you have a good time today, with your friends?" She nodded, her voice muffled against my dress, blissfully unaware of the humiliation I had endured. "I played outside with Miss Rick's grandbaby. She said her daddy's getting married too." "Will you go to his wedding?" The question landed like a slow, deliberate punch to my gut. It was the innocent cruelty of a child's question, a question that held no malice but carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. I couldn't find my voice right away. I just held her a little tighter. "We'll see, baby, we'll see." Later, as I rolled her down the hallway to her small bedroom, the wheels humming softly over the worn runner rug, she reached for my hand as she climbed into bed. "You smell nice," she murmured, her voice already thick with dreams, like perfume. "Did you see someone special?" "Just old friends, that's all," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She nodded, her eyes fluttering closed. Before she drifted off completely, she whispered one last question. "Will you tell me the story again? The one about how I came to be here?" I hesitated, my hand frozen on hers. The air in the room grew heavy. "Maybe when you're older, sweetheart." The truth was, that story never got easier to tell, because it was not a fairy tale. It was a testament to abandonment, a story that was not fair and certainly was not pretty. As she slept, the past came rushing back, unbidden. It was a stormy night 8 years ago, the Georgia sky split open by thunder that shook the very foundations of my little house. I remember opening the front door to a young woman standing on my porch, soaked to the bone, trembling, her eyes wide with a desperate, hunted look, as if she had outrun a demon. She could not have been more than 20. "You're Delene Ward, right, Mycelis's mother?" The name, the nickname I had not heard in weeks, not since he'd left for that new job in the city with promises of a great future, struck me in the chest. "Yes, I am. What is it?" She did not answer with words. Instead, she pressed a small, warm bundle into my arms. It was a baby, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, her tiny face scrunched and red from crying. "He said he didn't want her," the young woman choked out, the words torn from her by a brutal grief. "He said she'd ruin his life. I can't do this alone. I have nothing." My arms tightened around the infant instinctively. "What's her name?" I whispered, looking from the baby to the distraught mother. "Aurelia Moss. That's my name. The baby. Her name is Zora." Her voice cracked, shattering on the single syllable. "She's yours now, Miss Ward. You're all she's got in this world." And then, before I could say another word, before I could ask another question, she turned and fled, disappearing into the driving rain as if she were a ghost. I stood there on my porch, the baby wailing in my arms, the porch light flickering, the thunder echoing her desperate flight. That night, I became a mother all over again. This time to the child my own son had discarded like a piece of trash. Not long after that night, my world shifted again, violently and irrevocably. It was the night of the hit and run. I was driving home from the grocery store, the clock on the dashboard reading a little after 8. I had called Marcellus earlier that day, leaving him a message, my voice thick with a loneliness I tried to hide. "I just need to hear your voice, baby. I haven't seen you in a while. I love you." He never called back. I remember a sudden, blinding flash of headlights in my rearview mirror, a high, terrifying scream of tires on wet asphalt, and then an impact of bone-jarring force. The world spun into a vortex of shattering glass and screeching metal. And then there was only blackness. When I woke up, the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room was the first thing I saw. A doctor with kind, tired eyes told me what had happened. I had been hit by a car that never stopped. My legs were done for. The connection was severed. I would never walk again. In the weeks that followed, I waited. I hoped. I prayed that my son would walk through that door. He never came. He never called. Weeks turned into a month before I finally stopped hoping, before I accepted that the son I had raised was gone. That was the last time I had ever allowed myself to expect kindness from him, until the wedding, until that shove, that public shaming, reminded me with brutal clarity that some wounds never truly heal. They just learn to sit quietly inside you, waiting. And now, years later, that same baby, his baby, was sleeping peacefully in my house, dreaming under the same roof that he had once sworn he would never return to. I looked at Zora's tiny chest rising and falling in the soft light from the hallway, her hand still loosely clutching mine even in sleep. "You are safe here, sweetheart," I whispered to the sleeping child. "I do not know if your daddy ever will be." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I turned off her lamp, but the memories refused to dim. Somewhere out there, across the glittering, rain-slicked city, Marcellus was celebrating his new life, a life built on a foundation of lies and cruelty. And I was here, tucking in the part of his own heart that he had thrown away. I wheeled myself back to the kitchen and looked again at that damned velvet box. The gold watch inside still gleamed, perfect and untouched. My husband Roy used to say, "Time tells on everybody, Deline. It has a way of exposing the truth." I ran my fingers across the smooth lid, the velvet cool beneath my touch, and whispered into the empty, silent room. "Then let time talk. Because I am done explaining. People think power is loud, that it announces itself with the roar of thunder. But I have learned that real power, the kind that endures, hums. It is patient and it is steady, like a storm gathering its strength far out at sea, deciding with cold precision when and where it will finally break. That is exactly the kind of power Langston Keene wielded. The morning after the wedding, the morning after my public humiliation, he did not call me. There were no frantic check-ins, no bouquets of flowers sent with a sympathy card. That was not his way. Langston was a man who answered insult with strategy, not sympathy. I had seen that fire before, burning with a calm, lethal intensity behind his eyes, when he spoke of boardroom betrayals, of men who mistook his kindness for weakness. He had once told me he hired my son years ago out of respect for me, not because Marcellus was the best candidate, but, as he put it, because he reminded me of me. He said I had a backbone you could build cities on. I had thought it was just flattery back then. But that morning, sitting in his glass-walled office that seemed to float above the city, Langston was not smiling. "Close the door, Naraya," he said to his executive assistant. His voice was low, even the kind of tone that told you the conversation about to happen was not just business. It was something more. Naraya Pope was a sharp, formidable woman in her mid-30s, with her hair pulled back in a slick, severe bun. She was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. She stood before his desk, tablet in hand, but I imagine there was the faintest trace of nervousness in her stance, a slight tightening around her eyes. Langston leaned back in his leather chair, his hands clasped behind his head, a picture of calm. "You saw what happened yesterday?" "Yes, sir," she would have replied, her voice professional, measured. "It is all over the private office chat. Somebody recorded a short clip." He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing to slits. "And?" She would have hesitated for a fraction of a second. "It is bad, sir. People are asking questions. They are saying they did not know that was his mother." Langston's jaw flexed, a subtle, dangerous movement. They did not need to know. What they saw was a man revealing his character in its rawest form. He stood then and walked to the towering floor-to-ceiling window. The city of Atlanta sprawled beneath him, a kingdom of steel and glass. The skyline reflected in the window looked like a battlefield waiting for his command. "Do you know why I kept Marcellus Ward on the payroll all these years, Naraya?" he asked quietly, his back to her. She would have known not to answer, not to fill his silences. He turned, and his voice, though soft, was as cold as the glass he looked through, because of her. Because Delene Ward reminded me of a decency I thought had gone extinct. That woman, the one he pushed to the ground, she was the one who vouched for him when no one else would. She was the one who co-signed the letters, who helped him get the education that put him in this very building. I found out years later that she pawned her own wedding jewelry to make one of his tuition payments. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement of profound disappointment, and that boy, her son, repaid her by humiliating her in front of a room full of strangers. I can almost see the widening of Naraya's eyes, the flicker of shock. "You want me to pull his record, sir?" "Everything," Langston would have said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Start an internal freeze. Expense card, vehicle access, corporate housing lease, system permissions, all of it. Mark it under a routine compliance verification. I do not want to raise any alarms just yet. I want to see who he really is when the floor begins to shift beneath his feet." Naraya's fingers would have been flying across the screen of her tablet. "Understood, sir. And one more thing," Langston would have added, his gaze still fixed on the city below. "If that video clip makes its way outside the walls of this firm, I do not want this company's name anywhere near it. We do this by the book. A conduct review, documented reasons, a clean and professional closure. Do you hear me?" "Yes, sir." Crystal clear. He would have turned back to the window, his voice even softer now, almost mournful. "People always show their loyalty too late. Naraya Delene Ward has never once asked me for anything. Not a single thing. She did not even want her son to know I was helping him, that I was extending him favors because of her. She said it might make him lazy." He paused. I guess she was right. Across town, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the morning news murmuring from a small television in the corner, completely unaware of the tectonic plates already shifting under my son's life. The velvet box still sat by the window, a sliver of morning sunlight bouncing off its surface like a tiny, silent warning. And somewhere between the rich aroma of brewing coffee and the steady hum of the old refrigerator, I felt a knot in my chest, one I had carried for years, begin to ease. It was not forgiveness. No, that would require a different kind of miracle. It was something else. It was the feeling of the air pressure changing just before a storm breaks. It was the sense that balance, after a long and painful absence, was finally considering coming home. At that exact moment, in that glass tower downtown, Naraya Pope hit enter, and in a matter of seconds, across multiple encrypted systems, access was frozen. The keycard to his company car would ping as inactive. His corporate credit card would show a suspension pending review. Langston would have watched the confirmation lights flash green on her screen. "Good," he would have said quietly. "Now, we wait. Now, let's see how a man behaves when the world finally stops clapping for him." And while he may have said it in the context of business, I know a part of that was deeply personal. Because in that moment, Langston Keene was not just protecting a corporation's reputation. He was defending the honor of the woman whose quiet dignity his star employee had tried to shatter in front of strangers. The lever had been pulled, the trap had been set, my son just did not know it yet. I do not know what wounds a parent more deeply, watching your child fall from a great height, or the slow, agonizing realization that you were the one who built the ladder he used to climb high enough to look down on you. That morning, I sat by my window, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, the taste of it as bland and gray as my mood. And for the first time in nearly a decade, I made a decision. I rolled my chair to the back of my closet, to a place even Zora did not know existed, and pulled down an old, dusty box. The smell of old paper and faded ink hit me first. A scent of memories, of sacrifices, of a life lived in paperwork. I pulled the contents out and spread them across my kitchen table, the scattered documents looking like pieces of evidence from a trial no one else knew was happening. Tuition statements from a university he bragged about attending on a full scholarship. Loan agreements I had co-signed when his credit was non-existent. Stacks of money order receipts from late-night trips to the Western Union. Hospital co-pays from emergencies he never bothered to thank me for covering. And there it was, the letter I had written to Langston's firm all those years ago, a carefully worded, heartfelt plea for an internship on Marcellus's behalf, signed in my name because he had missed the deadline himself. Every single document told the same, silent story. A mother's signature, a mother's savings, a mother's unwavering support, covering for her son's silence and his ever-growing sense of entitlement. I ran my hand over a faded college bill, the paper thin and soft with age. $14,280, due in full. I remembered that one vividly. I remembered pawning my wedding band, the one Roy had placed on my finger, to cover that final payment. He had promised to pay me back as soon as he graduated. He never did. A funny thing about gold, I thought, it never really leaves you. It just comes back in another form. Perhaps that is why I had held on to that watch so closely, so desperately. I rolled toward the small dresser in the corner and lifted the velvet box again, opening it slowly, like a confession. The gold still gleamed, untouched by time, even as the man who was meant to wear it had become a stranger. My husband Roy used to hold this watch in his palm and say, "If a man ever forgets what it took to raise him, Deline, time will remind him." That's what this watch is for. He never knew how prophetic his words would be. I glanced at the small clock on the kitchen wall. Its steady ticking seemed to beat in rhythm with the memories flooding my mind. The day I co-signed for his first car, a car he later claimed he bought with his own signing bonus. The day I wired him money in another city because he said his wallet had been stolen, a lie I only uncovered years later. The time he begged me, with tears in his eyes, to lie to a landlord so he could secure that fancy uptown apartment he could not afford. I did it all. I signed. I paid. I lied. I did it all thinking one day he will remember. One day he will understand who always had his back. Now, I knew better. The low hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet kitchen as I flipped through the final envelope. Inside was something I had not laid eyes on in years. A letter on Langston's official company letterhead, thanking me for my discretion and continued support during Marcellus's difficult early years of employment. He had written in his own hand, "Your belief in your son has helped me believe in giving him a chance. He has potential. Let us see if he earns it." Potential. That word used to sound like hope. It used to fill me with a fierce maternal pride. Now, it just sounded like a cruel joke told far too late. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that tasted of a truth I had refused to face for too long. All this proof, all this paper, all these years of sacrifice, and not one single thank you. Just a shove in front of strangers and the echo of their laughter that still rang in my ears. But I was not going to beg him to understand. I was not going to chase public pity or go viral with my pain. No. My pain did not need an audience. It needed an accounting. That is when I made my decision. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old, forgotten notebook. It was a small brown ledger with cracked leather edges, my own neat handwriting across the front. Ward family records. Inside were lists of every cent I had ever loaned, every favor I had ever granted, every sacrifice I had ever made, all meticulously recorded. I turned to a fresh, empty page. At the very top, I wrote, in firm, clear letters, "Debts paid in full, consequences pending." From the other room, I could hear Zora's faint laughter. She was playing with her dollhouse, her world innocent and unaware that the very atmosphere in our small home had just shifted. I looked back at the mountain of papers on my table and whispered to myself, "This is not revenge, Deline. This is inventory." When I reached for the watch again, something inside me had steadied. I clicked it open, the ticking of its intricate mechanism louder now, sharper. I placed it directly on top of the ledger, like a judge's gavel, like a final, unbreakable seal. There would be no spectacle, no shouting matches, just a quiet, methodical timing. I began to sort everything into neat folders. Education, housing, medical, business. Each one labeled clearly, every signature accounted for, every dollar traced. It was the evidence of a life he had built, unknowingly, on my back. As the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across my kitchen, I slid the final folder shut, and a strange, unfamiliar peace washed over me. This was not anger anymore. This was arithmetic. Every dollar, every promise, every broken word, I finally had the proof. And as I turned the watch face toward me, its golden hands ticking away the final moments of his old life, I whispered to the empty room, "Time is about to collect." Then I closed the lid, locked the drawer, and went to fix Zora her supper. Have you ever witnessed pride melt in real time? Not slowly, like ice under a gentle sun, but in a sudden, ugly, violent rush. The kind of rapid disintegration that floods a man's face before he has even had a chance to understand what the loss of dignity truly means. That is what 24 hours can do when time, patient and methodical, finally decides to collect its due. By the next morning, I had already moved on. I was wiping down my kitchen counters, the scent of lemon and bleach a small, clean victory in a world that felt messy. Zora was at school, humming that same little off-key tune she loved, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. My phone, sitting on the counter, buzzed with a news alert. Keen Meridian Systems announces temporary internal freeze for compliance review. I did not know what all those corporate words meant, but a cold, certain feeling in my chest told me that Langston had begun his quiet, meticulous accounting. Across town, Marcellus was walking through the gleaming, cathedral-like lobby of that glass-walled building. He held a cup of expensive coffee in one hand, still cloaked in the comfortable illusion that he was somebody, that his world was secure. The receptionist offered him her usual bright, practiced smile, a smile that faltered for a fraction of a second as her computer screen flashed a silent crimson warning. His employee ID badge, usually a key to his kingdom, beeped once, a flat final note of denial. He tried it again, a little harder this time, an edge of irritation creeping into his posture. Another buzz, louder, more insistent. "The system must be down," he muttered, forcing a tight, unconvincing smile. He glanced around. People were watching. Not openly, but in that subtle way people do, their eyes flicking towards him over the tops of their phones and laptops. He forced a laugh, a sound that was sharp and brittle, and swiped the card again and again. The sleek, chrome turnstile did not move. It remained a silent, impassable barrier. A uniformed security guard, a man who usually greeted him by name, walked over, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Ward, can you please step aside for a moment?" Marcellus blinked, a flicker of confusion and indignation in his eyes. "I work here." "Yes, sir. That is what it says. But your profile has been placed on a temporary administrative hold." He could feel their eyes on him now, the weight of their collective gaze, junior staffers, interns, the very same ones who used to rush to hold the elevator door open for him. Now, they stared as if he were an expired product on a grocery store shelf, something to be noted and discarded. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling slightly as he dialed Naraya's extension. It went straight to her voicemail. He tried again, dialing Langston's private line this time. Straight to voicemail again, a void where there used to be access. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Hey, Mr. Keene, it's me." He tried to keep his voice casual, but a note of panic had crept in. "There seems to be some kind of a mix-up with my badge. I cannot get upstairs. Call me, please." Outside, his company car, a glossy black sedan that was his primary symbol of success, waited in its assigned parking space. He hit the remote start on his keychain. Nothing. The engine remained silent. He hit it again, jabbing the button with his thumb. Still nothing. The small screen on the key fob, which usually glowed with a welcoming light, now flashed a single brutal message in stark red letters: "Access revoked." By now, a sheen of cold sweat had collected under the collar of his expensive shirt. He slid into the driver's seat anyway, a desperate, irrational act, and jabbed the start button on the dashboard over and over. "Come on," he hissed, the words a prayer to a machine that was no longer listening to him. But the profound, absolute silence that answered him was louder and more damning than any engine could ever have been. That is when the first tear slipped. It was quick, almost accidental, a hot trail of shame on his cheek. He got out of the car and slammed the door, the sound echoing in the cavernous quiet of the executive parking garage. He started pacing, a caged animal in a tailored suit. A couple of employees from the marketing department walked past, whispering to each other, their voices just loud enough to carry. "Isn't that the guy from that wedding video?" one of them asked, not even bothering to lower her voice. "The one who pushed his own mom down?" He froze, his head snapping toward them as if he had been struck. "What did you just say?" But they were already walking away, their pace quickening, refusing to meet his eyes. He pulled his phone out again, his hands trembling now. He opened his personal banking app. His balance was fine, but then he tried to use his corporate card to order a car service. Transaction declined. He tried his personal debit card for the same transaction, a small purchase. Transaction declined. He stared at the screen in disbelief. His accounts, both personal and professional, which had been linked through the company's executive benefits program, were blinking with zeros where comfort and security used to live. 24 hours. That is all it had taken. Back at my house, I did not gloat. I felt no savage thrill of victory. I simply folded Zora's school uniform, the small plaid fabric soft and familiar in my hands, and set it aside for the laundry. The television murmured in the background, tuned to the local business news. Low-volume sources confirm that Keene Meridian is conducting a comprehensive internal compliance review following recent allegations of employee misconduct. The anchor said Langston Keene's name was nowhere to be mentioned in the official statement. That is how you know a man's power is clean. It does not need to shout its own name when it makes a move. Meanwhile, across the city, in a grand sun-drenched breakfast nook, Marcellus's new bride, Corinne, and her parents were reading the very same report on a tablet. The mother's lips, I imagine, were pressed into a thin, bloodless line. "We cannot transfer the honeymoon funds with this cloud hanging over him, Derek. It is a public relations scandal waiting to happen." Her husband, a man whose face was a permanent mask of stern disapproval, would have sighed, a sound of pure, calculated pragmatism. "You are right. Freeze the wire transfer. We will tell them the bank has flagged it for a security delay." And just like that, with a quiet word and a tap on a screen, Marcellus's brand new marriage began its first official day with no flight to a tropical paradise, no five-star hotel, and no access to the river of money he had so eagerly married into. By mid-afternoon, he was sitting on the curb beside that silent, useless car. His jacket was off, thrown onto the passenger seat, his expensive tie hanging loose like a noose he had just escaped. He had his hands over his face, his body trembling with silent, racking sobs. The Atlanta sun was merciless, the asphalt hot enough to sting through the fabric of his trousers. People passed him, men and women he had once considered his colleagues, his subordinates, and they did not look at him. He had become invisible. A security guard approached him, his voice gentle but firm. "Sir, you cannot sit here. This is a private access zone." Marcellus did not move. His shoulders shook once, then again. No one could see what was running through his mind, but I can guess. Perhaps it was the image of me, his mother, on that cold ballroom floor. Perhaps it was the echo of his own voice, dripping with contempt, calling me a poor rat. Or perhaps it was simply the hollow, empty sound a man hears when every single door he has ever built his life around closes and locks at the exact same time. When the clock on his phone, the last functioning piece of his old life, hit the exact same hour that I had left his wedding, 24 hours to the minute, he finally broke. Right there on that perfect, clean city street, the golden boy of Keene Meridian, the man who had everything, cried like a lost and terrified child. And while the world he had tried so desperately to impress simply walked on by, time, in its infinite and brutal wisdom, finally did what it had always promised it would do. I have seen storms take weeks to build and only seconds to break. This one, the one that would tear through my son's life, started with a single, anonymous upload. No one ever found out who posted it first. Perhaps it was a wedding guest with a taste for drama. Perhaps it was one of those waiters filming for fun who captured a moment of unexpected cruelty. But by Tuesday morning, the internet had found me. The headline on a popular gossip blog was stark and brutal. Corporate hotshot pushes disabled mother to the floor at his own wedding. No names were mentioned yet, no company tagged. Just the video. 37 seconds of my humiliation, replayed in perfect, high-definition clarity for the entire world to see. The clip started with my hopeful smile, faint but real. Then his voice, sharp as a shard of glass. "I never invited you, you poor rat." Then the shove, the fall, the collective gasp of the crowd, and finally, that little girl's tiny, clear voice saying, "It's okay, ma'am." I sat in my kitchen, the screen of my phone glowing with a cold blue light, my hands trembling as I watched myself hit that polished marble floor again and again and again. Zora was still at school. Thank God for that small mercy. There are some things you must protect a child from for as long as the world allows. I did not share the video. I did not comment on it. I did not even have the stomach to scroll through the comments section, but I did not have to. The notifications poured in like a flood, friends and distant relatives sending me the link with messages of shock and support. The comments, they told me, were a tidal wave of outrage. Heartless. Who does that to their own mother? I hope she is okay. He deserves to lose everything. The clip had already made its way through corporate circles by noon. Langston did not need to send me an update. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere through the air itself. Public shame has a scent. It is metallic, like blood just before it dries. At Keen Meridian, phones buzzed nonstop in every cubicle and office. Private group chats exploded with the video link. The man everyone used to envy, the golden employee with the corner office and the fancy perks, had become the headline they all whispered about between meetings. Down on the executive floor, in the hushed, carpeted corridors of power, Jasper Lyle, the firm's head of human resources, leaned over his expansive desk, rubbing his temples as the video looped silently on his monitor. Langston stood near the window, his arms crossed, watching the city skyline as if he were measuring how far a man could fall before he broke something essential. "This is not just a public relations issue, Langston," Jasper said finally, his voice heavy. "It is a profound conduct issue." That was his mother. He began to list the potential violations. The company's code of ethics, behavior clauses, the code of respect for individuals both inside and outside the workplace. Langston nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Document everything, Jasper. The timeline, the list of his corporate privileges, any past complaints, his travel receipts. I want a full, unassailable record ready for a legal audit. You want me to call him in for a meeting?" Langston did not look away from the glass. "Not yet. Let him sweat. If he calls you, you tell him his case is under internal review. Standard procedure." Jasper hesitated, the quintessential HR professional weighing the legal nuances. "Do you want me to classify this as professional misconduct or a personal conduct violation?" "Both," Langston said quietly, his voice devoid of any emotion, "because what a man does in public tells you everything about who he will be behind a client's back." By that afternoon, the video had jumped from private chats to public LinkedIn posts, disguised under a thin veneer of polite corporate language. Someone had captioned it, "Character is what you do when you think no one is watching." The irony was dead. Everyone was watching now. Marcellus's phone would not stop vibrating, a relentless, buzzing torment in his pocket. Every time he dared to look at it, every scroll was another comment, another tagged post, another former colleague saying, "Wait, isn't that the guy from Keen Meridian's marketing division?" By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, HR had received 6 anonymous reports from employees, all citing a pattern of arrogance and a disrespectful tone from Marcellus Ward. The very same people who had once laughed at his jokes and complimented his suits were now meticulously building a paper trail against him. Meanwhile, at my house, I turned off my phone and rolled my chair to the window. Outside, the late afternoon sun touched the leaves of the old magnolia tree in my yard, turning them gold for a fleeting second before sinking below the horizon. I whispered to myself, to the empty room, to the memory of my husband. "See, Deline? You did not have to lift a single finger. The truth has its own hands." Across the city, Jasper Lyle finalized the escalation memo. Subject: Marcellus Ward. Alleged gross misconduct, both within and outside of the workplace. Recommendation: formal inquiry under Ethics Policy Section 3B. He hesitated for a moment before clicking send, muttering to himself, "The man is about to find out what a reputation feels like when it stops working for you." At exactly 5:17 p.m., the internal memo landed in Langston Keen's inbox. A copy was automatically archived in the secure HR records. In that same minute, the video crossed 500,000 views online. By early evening, people were tagging Keen Meridian's official corporate accounts on every social media platform, asking the same pointed question over and over again. Does this man still work for you? Langston's office grew dark, the city lights beginning to glitter outside his window. The only light in the room came from his monitor. He scrolled through the comments just once, his jaw tight with a cold, controlled anger. Then he closed the browser. "Let it burn slow," he said under his breath. I did not know any of this was happening in real time. I only knew that for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of peace that night. It was the kind of peace that sits heavy and deep in your bones, not the loud celebratory kind. Because as I lay in bed, listening to the soft rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan, I realized something profound. The world, in its chaotic and often cruel way, was finally doing the one thing I had been too tired, too heartbroken to do for myself. It was showing my son, in the harshest and most public way imaginable, who he really was. People talk about revenge as if it is always a raging storm, a thing of loud thunder and destructive lightning. But they forget that it can also be the quiet, methodical work of paperwork, small, precise, and utterly devastating. The kind of weapon that can slice a man open one document at a time, so quietly he does not even know he is bleeding until it is too late. At Keen Meridian, that is exactly what was happening. Jasper Lyle's office, usually a pristine and orderly space, had been transformed into a war room. Files were spread across his large conference table, sticky notes bloomed like strange flowers on the walls, and receipts were arranged in neat, incriminating rows. On the large screen at the end of the room was a spreadsheet, a digital ledger of damnation, listing every single thing Marcellus Ward had ever received under the umbrella of company perks. There was the generous housing allowance for his uptown apartment, the lease for the glossy black sedan, the unlimited expense card, the substantial annual bonuses. And next to each entry, in a column marked Approval Authority, was the same name, over and over again, L. Keen. But Jasper had dug deeper. He had cross-referenced dates and internal memos, and in the notes section, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Each major approval, each significant perk, was tied not to a specific performance metric, but to a quiet, informal goodwill. And every single thread of that goodwill, if you pulled on it long enough, traced back to one name, Deline Ward. Langston stood over the table, his hands clasped behind his back, a silent, imposing general surveying his battlefield. "Do you see the pattern, Jasper?" Jasper, a man not easily rattled, nodded slowly, his expression grim. "I do. Every one of these approvals is tied to a personal assurance, not a formal merit-based review. There is no violation of the law here, Langston, but it is a clear case of favoritism," Langston finished for him. And he did not just accept it, he leveraged it, he exploited it. "Look here. There are transactions on this expense report that never received the required internal clearance. Restaurant charges from cities he had no business in, out-of-scope reimbursements for personal electronics. And look at this one, multiple expense submissions for the same client dinner, just weeks apart." Langston stared at the monitor, his jaw tightening until a muscle pulsed in his cheek. "That was not a client dinner, Jasper. That was his wedding rehearsal. I recognized the vendor." Jasper hesitated, the HR professional in him weighing the new legal exposure. "Are you sure you want to include that specific detail in the official report? It will tie your name directly to his in the formal record. It could be perceived as a conflict of interest." "I am already tied to him," Langston replied, his voice flat and hard. "We might as well make the knot honest." He turned and walked toward the large window, pulling back the blinds to look down at the executive parking lot many floors below. The space where Marcellus used to park his glossy black sedan was empty now, a concrete scar. A new rental car assigned to a rising star in the finance department sat in its place. It looked almost symbolic. The very piece of ground he had built his pride upon now carried someone else's wheels. Back at my house, I was not pacing. I was not making furious phone calls. I was not shouting at the heavens. I had done enough of that in the first half of my life, and it had never fixed a single thing. This time, I just kept my hands busy, sorting through that same stack of papers I had pulled from the dusty box in my closet, bills with my neat, careful handwriting in the margins, old checks endorsed with my initials. The undeniable paper and ink proof that half of the glamorous life my son had bragged about was built on a foundation of loans and favors I had quietly covered. It is a strange thing, how a simple piece of paper can feel so much heavier when the truth is sitting on it. I pulled out a clean manila folder and labeled it in my clearest handwriting, Financial Assistance, Ward Family. Inside, I placed everything: the tuition receipts, the co-signed car note, the mortgage guarantee for his first condo. Even the email Langston had once sent me, the one thanking me for my continued confidence in my son. Zora was sitting at the kitchen table with me, coloring in a book, her small tongue sticking out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She glanced up from her drawing every now and then, her large brown eyes curious. "Grandma, why are you writing all that stuff down?" I managed a faint smile. "I am just keeping records, baby. Sometimes grown-ups forget things very easily." She nodded, a solemn grown-up expression on her small face, as if she understood completely. "Daddy forgets too?" The question, so simple and direct, stopped my hand mid-motion. I looked at her. I really looked at her. At that same unmistakable set of deep brown eyes I saw every time I looked in the mirror, at the stubborn set of her small chin. Maybe one day he will remember, sweetheart. At that very moment, in another part of the city, in that glass and steel tower, Jasper Lyle clicked Save All on his comprehensive report and turned to Langston. "Once this report goes to the Compliance Committee, it is officially out of our hands. Are you sure you are ready for the fallout from this?" Langston nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "I am not starting a fire, Jasper. I am simply removing the shelter that has been keeping him dry from a storm he created himself." Meanwhile, back at my house, I sealed my own folder and placed it inside a deep drawer, alongside the others. My mind was not on revenge anymore. It was on peace. I had learned a long and bitter lesson in my life. When you spend your days chasing revenge, you start breathing their air, living in their world of anger and chaos. But when you simply document the truth, you get to stay in yours. That night, I brewed myself a small pot of chamomile tea, my hands steady for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I thought about calling Langston for an update, but I decided against it. I did not need the noise. I did not need the details of the demolition. I just whispered to myself, to the quiet house, "Let the process do what the heart cannot." Somewhere downtown, printers were humming, spitting out copies of Jasper's meticulously compiled report as it was distributed to the Internal Audit Committee. Each printed page was a quiet, contained explosion. Every paragraph, another deep cut in the carefully constructed image Marcellus had built around himself. By midnight, Langston had signed off on the final document authorizing the formal review. He did not smile. He did not raise a glass in a silent toast. He did not even exhale with any sense of satisfaction. He simply whispered to the empty, darkened room, "That is enough," and he shut his office light off. At that same hour, I slid my own ledger into the drawer beside Roy's old gold watch, closing it softly, like a prayer, and that is how you dismantle a man who has built his entire life on borrowed grace. Not with a shout, but with 1,000 silent paper cuts. Have you ever seen a man's pride shrink so fast it can no longer find its own reflection in the mirror? That is what happens when the official letter arrives. It does not come with a clap of thunder or a dramatic pronouncement. It just comes in a plain, unassuming envelope, the kind that looks far too simple for the devastating power it carries. It was Friday morning when Marcellus got his. The envelope was slid across the polished granite of the front desk in the Keen Meridian lobby. The receptionist, a young woman who used to flirt with him, was too polite, too professional to look him in the eye. He tore it open right there, in the middle of the lobby, his hands shaking so violently he could barely read the words. Inside, the text was cold, impersonal, and brutal. Effective immediately, you are placed on indefinite administrative suspension pending the completion of a formal internal investigation into potential violations of the company's Code of Conduct and Ethics policies. All access to company systems, accounts, and physical properties remains restricted. There was no signature from Langston, just the sterile, typed name of the Human Resources Department, Office of Compliance. He read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into a different meaning, into something like mercy. But mercy had clocked out a long time ago. Upstairs, in the security office, Jasper Lyle watched him on the lobby camera feed. He did not gloat. Good HR people do not celebrate collapses. They just meticulously file them away. When Marcellus, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, stormed toward the elevator bank, 2 security guards met him halfway. Their movements were calm, practiced, and unyielding. "Sir, your badge is inactive. We will need you to hand it in." "I am just going up to my office," he snapped, his voice cracking. "Your access has been paused, sir. It is company policy." People were watching again. Phones were out, their owners pretending to check emails, but their cameras were catching every second of his public unraveling. Someone whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "That's him." "This is a mistake," Marcellus said, his voice now a desperate plea. "I will talk to Mr. Keene myself. I will clear this up." The security guard remained calm, his voice a monotone. "You will need to schedule that through the Human Resources Department, sir." When he tried to swipe his badge one last time, a final, desperate act of defiance, the small red light flashed again. The turnstile did not budge. The ambient hum of the building he used to love, the soft lobby music, the expensive smell of coffee and success, now felt like a soundless, suffocating scream. By noon, the company credit lines had been officially and permanently suspended. The smart lock on his corporate apartment blinked red when he tried to enter later that evening. Inside, the lights remained dark. The utilities, he would soon discover, had been throttled through a system clause in his lease that tied them directly to his employment status. That is what happens when your entire luxury life belongs to someone else's payroll. The water would not run. The thermostat was frozen at 72 degrees. The state-of-the-art refrigerator hummed faintly but would not cool. Every single comfort he had ever bragged about was slipping into a cold, profound silence. And while all of that was happening, Kareen's family was already 3 steps ahead of the scandal. In a plush law office across town, her father, Mr. Astor, a man who moved through the world with the cold precision of a shark, was sitting stiffly at the head of a long mahogany table. His attorney, a man with a similarly predatory smile, slid a thick folder toward him. "We have prepared the motion to secure her personal assets as separate from his. Do you want me to file it today?" He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Do it. Quietly. I want no headlines. I do not want our family name anywhere near this mess." His wife, a woman who wore her pearls like armor, adjusted her silk scarf. "I told you he was unstable, Derek. That family of his has always had drama." Their lawyer smirked faintly. "You will likely want to revoke the honeymoon trust fund as well." "Already handled," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "The wire was stopped 2 days ago." At that very same moment, Marcellus sat in his useless car outside that dark, silent apartment, sweat beading on his neck, his tie finally undone. He kept scrolling through the contacts on his phone, his thumb hovering over my name. Mom. He did not press it. Shame is a heavy, heavy thing to carry through a phone line. Back at my house, I was cooking dinner. Something simple, red beans and rice. The rhythmic scrape of the spoon against the old cast-iron pot was a calming, meditative sound. Zora sat at the kitchen table doing her homework, the tip of her tongue poked out in concentration as she wrote out her spelling words. I was not thinking about the company, or Langston, or even my son's inevitable tears. I was thinking about the quiet kind of justice. The kind you do not have to watch unfold to know that it is working. When the evening news mentioned Keene Meridian's temporary internal audit following an employee's serious misconduct, I did not react. I just kept stirring, slow and steady. Maybe some people expect revenge to taste sweet. Not me. Mine tasted like patience. And a little bit of salt. At that same hour in the city's bustling business district, Marcellus opened his laptop on a small table in a crowded coffee shop, desperate to access his work files, to find some piece of evidence to defend himself. The login screen rejected him again and again, until finally, the system displayed a new final message. User access permanently revoked. He slammed the lid of the laptop shut with a loud crack, his breath coming in ragged, grieving gasps. The barista looked over, startled. The man who had once strode confidently through the doors of skyscrapers in tailored suits now sat in a cheap cafe with nothing left but a failing Wi-Fi connection and a mountain of regret. The first stage of his consequence had finished its work. His suspension was not just professional, It was personal, invisible, and terrifyingly complete. And somewhere between the frozen pipes in his dark apartment and his cooling cup of coffee, Marcellus Ward finally began to understand. When you build your life on a foundation of borrowed grace, the eviction notice does not need to shout. It just shows up, dressed like a plain, simple letter. The night he finally came, I knew it was him before I ever saw his shadow on my porch. There are some sounds a mother never forgets. And the sound of her child's knock, when it carries the heavy rhythm of both guilt and desperation, is one of them. It was not the confident, demanding pounding of the man I had come to know. It was the trembling, hesitant rhythm of a boy who had finally run out of doors that would open for him. I was in the living room, folding a basket of warm laundry, the clean scent of it a small, ordinary comfort in the stillness of the night. Zora was already asleep, her breathing a soft, steady whisper from down the hall. The house was quiet, still, almost sacred in its peace. Then came the knock. 3 soft, tentative taps, a long, agonizing pause, and then one heavy, final one, like a heartbeat that had lost its way. I rolled my chair to the window and peered through the blinds. And there he was, my son, Marcellus Ward. His expensive jacket was wrinkled beyond recognition, his face unshaven and pale under the yellow glow of the porch light. His eyes, when they caught the light, looked wild and haunted from too many sleepless nights. The same man who had once stood tall in a room full of wealthy strangers and called me a poor rat now stood on my humble porch like a broken prayer. I opened the door but did not move my chair aside to let him in. I created a barrier with my own body. "What are you doing here, Marcellus?" He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet night air. "Mom, I need to talk. Please." The word please caught in his throat, as if it were a foreign object, a word his tongue was not used to forming. "You look hungry," I said quietly, my voice even betraying none of the turmoil in my chest, "but I am not sure if it is food you really came for." He tried to speak, but the words seemed to tangle in his mouth. "They froze everything, Mom. My cards, the car, the apartment. I have nowhere to go. I just need to stay here for a few days, just until this all clears up." I studied him then, really studied him. His clothes, though expensive, were dirty and smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. His eyes were red-rimmed from more than just exhaustion. He smelled like rain and fear. "Does Corinne know you are here?" I asked. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the worn wooden planks of the porch. "She is at her parents' place. They are saying things. Lawyers. I do not even know what is real anymore." I did not rush to answer him. I did not fill the silence. I let it stretch between us, long and heavy, long enough for him to feel the true weight of what he was asking of me. "Mom, please," he said again, his voice finally cracking, shattering on that second plea. "I know I hurt you. I was not thinking that day at the wedding. I just wanted everything to be perfect. And me showing up reminded you where you really came from?" I finished the sentence for him, my voice soft but unyielding. He dropped his eyes completely then, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I did not mean what I said. I swear to God, Mom, I did not mean it." I leaned forward in my chair, resting my hands on the armrests, my knuckles white. "You meant it enough to say it in front of the world, Marcellus. You meant it enough to push me." He looked like a man being physically crushed by the sound of his own name. "I am so sorry." "Sorry does not clean up the mess you made, Marcellus," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. "It just gives the mess a name." For a long moment, the only sound between us was the faint, electric buzz of the porch light. Then, I noticed the subtle gleam of headlights down at the curb. Langston's car. He was waiting, just as we had agreed he would. He had insisted on following me home after my last call with him, just to check in. He had said he wanted to make sure I was safe. I had never imagined that the person I would need to be kept safe from was my own son. Marcellus followed my gaze, and his shoulders slumped even further when he saw the dark, imposing silhouette of the car. "He is here." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "He is a friend, one who knows what the word respect looks like." He turned away from me then, pacing the small confines of the porch like a trapped animal. "So what? You are not even going to let me in? After everything you have done for everyone else your whole life?" The bitterness, the ingrained sense of entitlement, slipped out before he could stop it. It hit me like a slap. Not the kind that bruises the skin, but the kind that confirms a deep internal injury. It confirmed that what was left of his pride was still fighting, desperately and ugly, for control. I steadied my voice, drawing on a reserve of strength I did not know I had. I do not owe you a roof over your head, Marcellus. I already gave you life. I gave you 1,000 chances. And I gave you my silence for years when speaking the truth about you would have destroyed every opportunity you ever had. His chest rose and fell with a shallow, ragged breath. Then what am I supposed to do? I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering. You start by learning to stand on your own 2 feet. You go out there and you fix what you broke. You clean the mud off your own name before you ever dare to ask to borrow mine again. He did not move. Tears finally welled in his eyes, stubborn and hot, tears that looked as if they had been waiting years for permission to fall. I do not even know where to go, he whispered, his voice the broken sound of a lost child. I nodded my head slowly toward the dark, rain-slick street.